Welcome back to the American Recovery Podcast. This episode is the final episode of a three-part interview with Sean and Ashley, a couple who went through recovery together to reunite their family. Feel free to leave a comment, like this video, or subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Enjoy the show. Sean and Ashley, welcome back to the American Recovery Podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
No, I appreciate the two of you taking the time. You've got a very unique recovery story as far as how they overlap, how you guys work together, then how it was so impactful the way at different times you guys were leaning on each other or needing the other person in different ways to aid your recovery. And so that's kind of what I want to get into, because your story is so incredible around the state coming in and taking the kids and sort of how that went down. And I'd love for you to each kind of give, again, your perspective on how that went, and then sort of the follow-up from there, because I think that's the part where people look at and go, I couldn't imagine. And you've been there and you kind of lived that. And so if we can find a way to put that into a nutshell for people and help them go, there's way more involved in that situation than the average person probably understands. So I think it'd be a great conversation to have. So start with that moment. You got two kids already, and Ashley, you're at the hospital. Baby number 3 has arrived. So you're at the hospital. Sean, you're at home with the other two, correct? All right, take me from there. How that played out.
So Ashley was in the hospital with Caleb, tested positive for methamphetamine and marijuana. And I get a contact from child welfare saying that they wanted to do a welfare check, or a check just to make sure the kids were happy and healthy and taken care of. And so I loaded up the 2 kids because Ashley was at the hospital, and since it was a Kansas case, that I had to meet them in Kansas, meeting over back at my mom's house. Well, there were multiple police and child welfare there waiting for me, and which I didn't know. I still kind of thought it was like a well check or whatever. And then they just sat me down and told me that, dude, us living in the hotel and the baby testing positive for meth and our drug history, whatever, that they were going to pull the kids that day and then go over and pick up Caleb from Ashley at the hospital. So, which basically I was so confused and I didn't know what was going on for real. I was so mad and I had a lot of resentment towards KVC and child welfare at the time. So actually I sat at my mom's after they took the kids for a little bit because I really didn't know what to do. I was kind of lost.
They brought the older 2 kids to the hospital where I was, and came in. Before this, Sean had called me, and obviously I could barely understand him, but he just said, hey, they're taking the kids. And even at that point, you don't even really know what to expect because he was still confused. But DCF showed up at the hospital, brought my older 2 in. They did bring baby in to see me before I left. Was able to tell them bye, and they took all 3 of the children. I was alone for one, which was incredibly scary. And then you just wonder, you have nurses and doctors that are caring for you, but then you wonder, like, I remember after them taking my kids, I was scared to even ask a nurse for pain medicine because I was like, oh my gosh, they think so badly of me. But when they took the kids, I remember, and I was post C-section, I remember just getting up, walking to the door, and just collapsing down and bawling. I didn't really know what else to do. And kind of, I had to remain in the hospital for a whole nother 24 hours because I was post C-section. So here I was in the maternity ward, childless, have to stay another day. And it was likely the most traumatic day of my life. Eventually, Sean came back to the hospital. I don't remember exactly how long it took him to go to the hospital, but I do know that he hung out at his mom's for a little bit. And I think he's never told me this, but I think that he even kind of had some resentment towards me because at the end of the day, I was pregnant, the kids were gone, and he did not know how to process that. So he ended up going to a friend's house and then later joined me at the hospital, broken, scared. We actually, at that point in time, we actually left the hospital at one point to drive up to a gas station and essentially got high on that car ride and then came back. And then after they discharged me, we went to his friend's house where we slept on a couch and a floor for about 2 weeks. That was pretty much them removing the children. And so the trauma that he went through, them being deceitful and dishonest and not telling us the truth, while we both know and understand that maybe at that time they felt that that was the right way to handle it, it also caused a lot of resentment, a lot of fear, a lot of anger, because our first encounter with the child welfare system was a lie. It wasn't, it wasn't truthful. We had no idea where our kids were going. There was no explanation. There was no court paperwork. The only paperwork we left with was my post-delivery paperwork and the birth certificate for our child. So we really ultimately had no idea where our children were going at that time. So we were broken. And I think it was really, really a rough time for us too, because we hated life. We hated ourselves. And it's really hard to love someone else whenever you don't even love yourself. And when you're getting off drugs, you're just going through so many different things. So I think that we had some resentments toward each other that we had to work through in order to become a strong couple.
So in the course of the conversations I had with each of you, we discussed, had you two been going through some kind of like separation, or at the time had been apart for most of the previous 5 or 6 months?
So we were together up until delivery, and then we stayed together trying to work our case plan goals for about 6 months. So 6 months into our case is kind of when we separated for a little while. We separated for 6 months, and that's when Sean really fell deeper into his addiction and was doing things that I don't think he had ever done before. And I was staying with a friend, was able to pull some clean time together. I had about 6 months under my belt and was able to see the kids and have my visits and things like that.
Well, so we were staying at my friend's for, I don't know, it'd been a little while. My older brother was staying there also, and
I think it was about a month.
yeah. So, and then I woke up one day and she was all packed up and had her friend there to pick her up and she told me that Caleb wasn't my son, that she was going to go get clean. And that was about basically all I got out of her, really, for a while, because she'd left and I didn't have an explanation of anything. I didn't even really know what was going on.
And that was after the kids had been taken.
Yes.
Yeah. 6 months into the case, my mom had called me, and that fear of dealing with I don't want to say problem, but fear of dealing with consequences of your actions, things like that. And so mom said, pretty much told me next court date, they're going to bring up the fact that Caleb is not all Caucasian. And I hadn't even really processed that or thought about that aspect, but I was scared. I was scared to tell him. I didn't really know what to do. And in the back of my mind, I was like, well, he's going to leave me anyway. So I did leave in a hurry. The worst thing I've ever done to him. Just kind of leaving him in that aspect. And I think, and that's when I left, and that's when I was able to put those 6 months together. But that was probably a driving force of when he fell deeper into his addiction and started using in different ways. And then that eventually led to, at the end of it, so we were split up for 6 months. I kind of ignored him essentially for the first couple months, didn't answer his calls, tried to just disassociate. And I think that was probably due to me and my guilt and my shame and my remorse for the things I had done. But eventually, love finds a way, I guess.
Yeah.
So we did 6 months after that, we ended up back together. And during those 6 months, Sean wasn't able to see our children. He wasn't able to pass those UAs. He wasn't able to have the visits that I was having and things like that. And it really, really tore him up. But eventually, about 6 months in, we got back together. Did you have a visit at the end of that 6 months? No, it was like 10 months, because when we got back together, of course, we started using again together. And so it took him a while before he was able to get clean. And essentially, our caseworker, one of our caseworkers, had advocated for him to get a visit, even though he wasn't able to pull clean time together, right? Said, hey, I want you to see your kids.
I think it was as long as I was clean from meth, and they wasn't too worried about the marijuana at the time.
But they, in the beginning of our case, it was a rule you had to pass 2 UAs in order to see your children. And that wasn't something that he was able to do. He was living in Kansas City, living far away, didn't have transportation, and was probably using throughout a lot of that also. But that visit, an active addiction, out of sight, out of mind, is a real thing. And it's not because we don't love or we don't care. It's because we don't recognize. We don't even know what we're missing out on. And so I remember, gosh dang, you drove from Kansas City, and I had been seeing the kids for a little while, so it wasn't as emotional for me, but he was a wreck. Spent most of the visit crying with the kids, you know, and I think that was a major turning point from my perspective for him, because it was no longer out of sight, out of mind. It was in front of him. And so he was able to see and connect and realize that his children do still very much love him. And it took a couple months after that before we were able to get clean and stay clean. But it did pull him out of a rut. And I think that visit was a major driving force behind that. So
Yeah, because prior to that, I was getting caught using fake pee and stuff at my UAs and stuff.
But that desperation, he wanted to see his kids. And so that's what he knew in his mind would help him to be able to do that.
It's understandable. Sean, you described a time when the two of you started kind of a day on, day off, where like the concept of we've got to kick this sort of comes to mind, and you started kind of going a day to day thing. Did that start around the time after this visit, or was that right around that
I
time when
think it
they
was. I think it was more after we started getting into NA, or I started getting into NA a little bit more, which just was able to help me just see that it's easier to go by hour or by day instead of thinking that I have to stay clean for the rest of my life, which that was a big thing. Not really thinking that I got to stay clean forever instead of just for today. That which it it helped, you know. Plus being around a lot of people that were sober. So I mean, like I said, Narcotics Anonymous pretty much what saved our life. I mean, we had the motivation, we wanted to get clean, but I don't think we would have if we didn't get in NA. So
it was our safe space, you know.
when in the context of the call from the state saying you've got this much time until they're going to relinquish custody, where did you start in reference to that point?
well, I think we were in it going.
That phone call, my mom's phone call essentially was the one where she said, hey, you got court in 30 days, they're going to relinquish your rights. And that was the day that Sean walked out of the house we were staying at, went with my dad, and it was like, I think the next day that we ended up going to NA, and we were just so welcomed. But it was probably, I don't know, pretty soon after that phone call, because that became our safe place. We knew we have a meeting at 7. We wake up, we don't use, we go to a meeting, we don't use in between. And that was just kind of our life. And then we got enrolled in outpatient treatment, which ultimately, I don't know what his perspective on that was, but it was a box I had to check because I didn't get anything out of it. The thing with treatment centers and having to check that box if you're going through legal cases or whatever it may be is lots of times you can find more drugs in those treatment centers than you can on the street. Because if you're uninsured and you don't have income and you don't have a job, then you have to go to a free treatment center. And unfortunately, and I loved my counselor. I saw her the other day and it was like a beautiful moment. But, you know, when I would show up and do my homework, I would get almost made fun of, or, you know, like you're a class pet or whatever it may be. Like that's a real life thing, even in treatment. But I had to continue to go and check that box. So then we would go to a meeting to kind of recover from that situation.
That sounds exactly like what Sean was describing to me yesterday, and so that's a tough dynamic to go to, where I look at it, I've met people who have got into recovery through mandatory, whether it's court ordered or part of a plea agreement, whatever the case might be. They got into it and they found long-term recovery as a result, but mandatory element of that was not necessary. They didn't necessarily see that as helpful. They were just against a wall. And so is the necessity of that situation and how there's the margin of error so slim, is that what makes that such an impactful piece of your story, even though you look back and go, that was not the recovery treatment I would have opted for had I had any options?
I mean, I think that if you're asking if the outpatient treatment was helpful, definitely. Is that where you're going towards, or?
Kind of. You just mentioned that the experience was not good for you, and so I wasn't sure how that mandatory element of this, there's a barrier between you and losing your kids forever or getting your kids back, and
Right.
this less than pleasant form of treatment is stepping stone that you have to cross to get there.
Right. There was a lot of things that I got out of the classes. It was just, and some of the people I was in treatment with, I would go to a meeting with afterwards. So there were some really great attributes, but then there were some not so great. I think in a perfect world, what I really would have needed is inpatient treatment, because honestly, you don't really see people like us using as much as we were be successful with just an intensive outpatient program. My counselor was great. I connected with her. Our lectures were mostly good. My homework was valid. All of it was a part of my recovery. It was just the environment in which we were learning it wasn't the most positive. So they didn't have the same goals. They didn't have their children on the line. They didn't have those things. And so lots of them were, if I fail, I'm going to go to prison. And half of them weren't even scared of that. So that was kind of just the people we were in treatment with. But I would say it was helpful.
And I know that dynamic isn't for, there's enough people who have had treatment or prison or jail presented as the options. And I don't know many people who are just like, yeah, prison, let's do this.
Yeah.
So that element being at play, I've wondered how the different backgrounds that people are coming from and the different motivations play into how successful a treatment is for them. But also, I hadn't even considered the environment within the treatment program itself to be hampered by the people who are less interested in being there and more just using it as their "I'm not in prison yet" option. So Sean described you guys walking. Sean, I don't know if you remember how far it was, but do either of you remember how far you were walking? Because it was not described as a short walk to get to treatment every day.
Long enough we hated each other at the end of it. No.
Most of our walks ended up with fighting.
They really did, but we were withdrawing from methamphetamine. We had no energy. We were depressed. I would say probably a good 7 to 10 miles. Yeah, probably 7 to 10 miles.
One direction?
Well, we'd get a ride home sometimes from...
Because we would then go up to our meeting, which was at 7, and then we would get a ride home after about 10 days in, after you have hit some meetings, we would obtain transportation and they would take us home if we were there. They wouldn't let us walk.
So, but that's a big undertaking. Distance is regularly cited as a barrier to recovery for a lot of people. And so knowing that you took that's a big step. Most people won't walk that far for a lot of reasons, let alone do it repeatedly, because that was a 90-day program?
9 months. Mine was 9 months. It was 3 hours a night, 3 days a week. So 9 hours a week for 9 months.
Gotcha. And how long or how much of that 9 months were you having to walk it?
Maybe the first
part of it.
Maybe a month, if that, yeah.
Because after that, then we started going to NA a lot more, and a friend at NA helped us with a down payment on a vehicle. We bought a minivan.
So 9-month program, you're going 3 days a week, and that starts. How quickly after that phone call from your mom were you?
So we were enrolled in treatment. Mom said, hey, they're going to relinquish your rights. We had court coming up. So we got clean March 1st. And let's see. What was the question? I just spaced it all.
What was the time frame between that phone call and getting into treatment?
Probably 2 weeks. We had to, because those, for family guidance, which is where we went, we had to go and have an eval done. And it's not make an appointment, it's whoever gets here the earliest. And so we went at like 6 a.m. one morning, and it was a 3-hour intake process. And then they got started because we really wanted to have some things in our corner walking into court, not just a key tag. We wanted to have treatment started, and we had our NA sheet that was being signed so that we could show that we are in fact trying, because we were very fearful that we weren't going to get a second chance.
So tell me about that court appearance. How did you feel kind of going into that? And then tell me about the process and how that went down.
Well, court always scares me, so I don't know about anybody else.
I've never been in your circumstances, and court doesn't make me feel comfortable.
I've been in that same courtroom and been tried my whole life, so
Not for like 10 years,
yeah.
other than traffic.
I mean, well, now, but like back then it'd only been a few years since I'd seen him over an aggravated freaking home invasion, So, like, I had just gotten out of jail some years prior over a aggravated home invasion, and it's the same judge, same prosecuting attorney, like I knew them all.
I think he was probably, just because of his background and always being on that other end of the table, he was probably a little more nervous than me. I was nervous just that they were going to say, hey, you've had a year, where's your progress? Because we only had a month of progress. But it actually the judge just pretty much said, I see that we have some progress here. Let's see where this goes. Essentially giving us the warning that if we messed up again, that we would probably be losing our children. So definitely put some fear into us, while also giving us a second chance, is the way I see it, because they didn't have to do that, but they chose to do that with just a little bit of progress.
So how long of a continuation, or how regularly were they following up to?
I think it was every 3 months.
We had every 90 days, and then so the first court date was just that emergency custody after they took children. 3 months later, we didn't even show up to court, I don't think. At 6 months, I was at court. At 9 months, we didn't show up. And then at 1 year is about when we were both there present in the courtroom, doing our best to get it right.
And so they start offering the continuations. They've offered a little grace, but also plenty of incentive to go with it. How did they handle that? Like, if you were going to speak to judges and prosecutors who are handling child welfare and custody cases and everything that could have gotten wrapped into their case against you, how would you advise them to approach it so that people have the most encouragement and incentive to follow in the footsteps that you do?
I think that it's really important, that initial point of contact, and it wasn't the prosecutor or the judge that told me this. It was Sheila, our foster mom. But just knowing, hey, yeah, you messed up. No, we can't send the kids home, but we don't want to keep your kids. We want you to succeed. We want you to be successful, as opposed to a prosecuting attorney as a prosecuting attorney. And so his job is to dig in, and that emergency trial, half of it wasn't true, but it could have been. I don't know. And so that first court date was traumatic. I don't really have a whole lot of complaints there. Our judge has since retired, and I'm grateful for him because he gave us a second chance when he didn't have to. The prosecuting attorney was pretty strict and stern, and I think
he's always been that way, though.
Yeah, and that's what their job is, But to hear from a judge or a prosecuting attorney, hey, we don't want to do this. We want you to get better, and we want you to get your kids back. I think that would be a huge turning point in the case, because otherwise we're in defense mode. We're thinking everyone's out to get us. Everyone wants to keep our kids. And hearing that come out of a mouth of someone with authority, I think could definitely positively impact a case.
That makes sense. I think you're right. It changes the perspective that you're taking in that situation. Because if you're there to defend yourself, because they're attacking you and your character and your history and whatever else.
Right.
And that's the focal point. Whereas if they go in and say, there is something that you can accomplish through all of this, and that is getting your kids back. I think that is a great perspective to have, because we don't think about that coming from the other side. Like in law enforcement, that is one of the areas that you could find that way to be compassionate. Unfortunately, you were the hammer coming down on somebody, but if you could hammer somebody very compassionately, they had totally different reactions. Like you just weren't the person being all forceful and gruff, and that was what I preferred to be because I didn't. I look big, but I don't like to fight people, and so I couldn't that. So they had to think I was ready to take them down. Well,
Right.
I'm sitting there. Please don't make me fight you. I don't. I don't want to, but that's a good balance to strike for people on that side of the courtroom, so to speak, that they give something to be accomplished or something to work towards because it changes the entire direction of why you're there, and it's not this here's a laundry list of your mistakes that we're going to hold over your head and then also punish you for the rest of your life by taking your kids. So I
Right.
like that. I think that's really sound, and I'm glad you had a prosecutor and a judge that were willing to take that approach and were willing to acknowledge the
Yeah.
humanity that's still there and offer that opportunity. So that's awesome. Okay, so how did you feel after you walked out of court that day?
Be honest, I don't remember, so I don't know.
I think it was kind of, whenever we thought we had the potential to lose them, just knowing that we had another chance and there was another court date coming and that we hadn't lost them, and that we could continue to fight was a huge moment for us. For me, I can't speak for him, but
Yeah, I don't really remember.
and something that we did, and hopefully a lot of people will hear this, is, we talked yesterday a little bit about he did his, he worked his own program, I do my thing. So something that we actually did, we kept separate attorneys. And so we kept it separate. I mean, yes, we were in a relationship, but what we didn't want to happen is, if I had a bad day and I relapse, then Sean was still there and able to bring the kids home. So we kept it pretty separate in the courtroom. And I think it was a good thing. Granted, we didn't need to use it in that aspect, but truthfully, there's not a lot of couples that are able to maintain sobriety together fresh into recovery.
I haven't had a chance to talk with many couples. I've talked to a lot of people in recovery who the relationship blew up somewhere along the line, whether it was as a result of both of them being users or one of them being able to and then them not being able to rectify that. What do you think makes your situation so different? Because I think you kind of are that unicorn situation that most people have the opportunity to come out and then look back 9 years and go, well, yeah, then we got married and here we are and we're talking about recovery now. It's such an anomaly that I'm curious where you think things worked out in your favor or that you did differently that other people have not been able to replicate.
That's hard. God.
I don't know. Just being able to lean on each other, I think, was major help.
Yeah.
Which I don't think a lot of people know how to lean on somebody else without like crushing them.
And I think maybe we are totally different people. Like his personality and my personality is totally different. And I don't know if his strengths covered my weaknesses and my strengths covered his weaknesses. Anger was something that he really struggled with. And so it's something that we still talk about. And it's just sitting down, willing to learn with each other and grow as a couple and as a family. And like, I know his weaknesses and he knows mine. And so trying to find a way to communicate that in a positive manner, I think has done well. But we still argue. Don't get me wrong.
It sounds like
Every weekend. Every weekend.
Only on Saturdays though. No. And we're learning how to parent together. So just forgiving each other, moving past the past, things like that. But honestly, I don't know why our situation was different. It may have been because our children were on the line. That could have very well been, the driving force. And then to build something this beautiful and not share it together, I would be unfortunate.
the two different ways that you were introduced to substance use. I wondered about that. I don't have any clue about how that would factor into both how it went and then how you maintained getting out because you two came from such different backgrounds and different childhoods, especially like you look at the middle school, high school ages, and the way you two describe that age in your lives way different. And so I wonder how much of that having that dynamic of two different personalities, two different backgrounds, where you can fold that together into something stronger, as opposed to some people get into it together. That's, they start using together. They're kind of each other's triggers. I know that can play a part of it, and I know a lot of people who said, I can't. It's not just the drugs; it's also you. If I'm around you, the drugs are there. If I'm around the drugs, then you're there, and they'll kind of wrap that all together. And I wonder how real that is, because I've never experienced it, but I also met enough people who had to bail on drugs and someone else at the exact same time to make that clean break, that it doesn't surprise me, but it also, again, makes stories like yours that much more inspiring, because it's the needle in a haystack that you have been able to find and maintain. I mean, you're what, a little over 9 years?
Little over 8, 9.
Right?
What is it? 8. Over 8, little over 8. And we struggled and we failed. We were each other's triggers for forever. I mean, he was using, I was sick, he wanted to fix it, all of those things. And I think I had wandered off and tried to do this thing on my own and bring the kids home and stay clean and all of these things. But I didn't think it was possible on my own. We needed 2 incomes. We needed both of us fighting to bring our children together, to bring our children home, knowing that if we failed again, they may not ever come home. And so I think that was probably, maybe it was an intellectual way of thinking, I cannot bring my children home without him. And then we just ended up building this beautiful life together. And now we just choose every day not to give up on each other.
Describe those first few months, both with treatment and NA. I think Sean said at one point you were going about 3 times a day to meetings.
So 2-3 times a day. So we'd get
To meetings?
Yeah, we would go straight from Opportunity for Hope to the other ones, and then we had treatment prior to that.
Yeah, if you count treatment, we kind of, and then we ended up starting to go once a week. We joined group conscience, all of those things.
Oh yeah, we started chairing meetings.
Service work, things like that. And that was a major positive thing for our recovery, because we got
to lead them, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
How did it
on certain days
them versus to just be in a,
do what?
How did it impact you differently to lead those as opposed to just being in it?
It was a responsibility. You had to be there to open the doors. You had to, if you wasn't there, the meeting wasn't happening, or you'd get a call from my sponsor and he'd start griping at you because you missed a day or something, But there was no missing when you were a chair. So
I think it was something that we set up. Also, it was like, these people trust me. Like, these people trust me to show up here and lead this meeting. And so it was just an opportunity for growth also.
How long did you chair those meetings?
For a while, until we got our kids back, and then
I want to say about 6 months, and then we relocated to Atchison.
Oh yeah.
And so
it became harder.
Then I started school, the kids were home, and so it's, when you think about those things, recovery is so hard, because you have to maintain your recovery, but then all those things that you fought hard for start to come back into your life, and you have to weigh those things, and you have to put your recovery first, but you also have a family and things like that. So it's a difficult thing to manage and balance and figure out what's going to work for you. Because some people need 7 meetings a week, 365 days a year, forever. And that's fine. Recovery for you may look different than recovery for me. But I think our meeting attendance definitely declined after that, because we weren't close to our home group. We were having our kids all the time. And so, but I think we chaired meetings for about 6 months.
We tried for a while. Afterwards, it just didn't end up working out. One vehicle, living too far out, just made it hard. And until we were able to purchase a second vehicle, doing what we can, raising a family.
Was there opportunity for a new NA group in the Atchison area, or was that something that was just missing from that community?
They have an NA meeting, and I've been to Atchison. I was working at Valley Hope, and our patients started to, I don't even know if I can say that. because it's my job. But Atchison, I had a lot of patients that ended up showing up in meetings, and I didn't want to take away from their recovery or their opportunity to share. And I've been to some St. Joe meetings here and there too, supporting clean time and things like that. There's no meetings. We've been in Donovan County 4.5 years, and we would love to get something started here, but there's nothing in the area. The closest is St. Joe, so.
You have to drive a good 30, for some people, 40 minutes plus just to get to an NA meeting. And if you're an addict or any somewhat like what we were, you can barely even formulate enough time to get to that meeting, let alone a ride, or especially with it being 30 to 40 miles away, you're not going to. Hell, you can barely find a ride to make it 2 blocks to the gas station, get cigarettes and a pop if you wanted, let alone get a ride all the way to an NA meeting that's going to last an hour, plus with you talking outside afterwards and smoking your cigarette. It's going to be a good hour and a half, and now not a lot of people are just willing to just stop doing what they're doing. They can pick you up, take you to an NA meeting if it's not a part of their recovery also.
Gotcha. As I'm working on sort of my background to this, I was looking at the AA and NA websites because a lot of them have meeting locator maps on there, and I was not surprised because I dug into rural Kansas quite a bit in the course of my last job, but I was still moderately shocked at the scarcity of available meetings. Like, I'm in Wichita, multiple places I can go.
Yeah.
If I want to hit up an NA or an AA meeting. You get west of Dodge City and there's just nothing. You get to the corners, and if it's south, it might have a few, but the scarcity is there, and that's one of the biggest issues that is regularly cited for people getting into recovery is there has to be something there for them to do. It doesn't happen in a bubble, and you two are kind of perfect examples of that. There was a whole lot that had to work into your situation, and Ashley, you described having heroes and people who were looking out for you. And the number of people that you mentioned that it's like, okay, if so-and-so hadn't done this, I don't know how it would have gone. If we hadn't had this opportunity, like if Sean hadn't walked out that day and gone to my dad, like all the different people you described who were like, they had to do that for us to be, we might be somewhere, but it probably wouldn't be right here if those people, and it was 3 or 4 people that you cited.
Yeah.
And so I'm amazed at that. First of all, I love that there's that many people in different, because they were not all in the same places. It was your caseworkers. It was Sheila calling you and say, hey, we're going to Perkins, and like you said with Sean just saying, I can't do this anymore here. I have to go somewhere where I can start this new chapter, and walking out the door, because that's a hard thing to do. That's not an easy step to take to go. It's not just what I'm going through, it's where I'm going through it. And so if I can change my circumstances, I can change my location, I can change my surroundings, I can change my trajectory. And it may not have been as elegantly thought out as that, but the realization that where I'm at is going to make it happen is huge. And so, yeah, I hope that's something you're able to do at some point there in Donovan County, because that is one of those counties that I've been up there. I love the vicinity there. I haven't been able to spend nearly enough time up there. I have friends that I love dearly up in Troy, and I never get to spend anywhere close to enough time in that area of Kansas. It's a beautiful area, and the people were very, very nice and very, very fun to be around. And so it's one of those things you don't realize a resource is missing until you're looking for it and going.
Right.
A 40-minute ride for an hour and a half meeting and chat session, and then coming back, somebody's having to dedicate 3.5 hours of their day, if not a little more. And unless they're going, not really an option for a lot of people to make that trek. So,
And COVID, throughout COVID took away everything. COVID took away people's lifeline. And I think it's a good thing. One good thing that came out of COVID is there are a lot of online meetings, which can kind of keep you regulated, but it's not enough to start you on your journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It wasn't what people needed. And whenever you have a routine, you wake up, you don't use, you go to a meeting, you don't use in between, and you take that away, there were lots of people, 8, 9, 10 years of sobriety that ended up relapsing because they lost that dynamic and that routine.
Yeah, it was an unfortunate consequence because just from a life and business standpoint, I don't do well with online setting, and I need that human connection. I'm a different person in person, so to speak. So I couldn't imagine what that would be like to go. This is not just a thing that we do because we enjoy the coffee and the cigarette break afterwards. It's something that we are dependent upon to a certain extent, that we need as a part of our recovery to be in this community, because moving that community online it just moves conversations on. I think it does, because that cigarette break doesn't happen after an online meeting, so to speak. And that's what we found so much with just my work, was people didn't have the same interaction. People just logged off and they were done. And if that was the same experience people were having with an AA or an NA meeting, it
Right.
was massively detrimental to lose that connection. And isolation is already such a negative element of addiction. Yeah, that's unfortunate. I know, working with some of the jails here, that was one of the things I was doing with my last job, was trying to make it an option for people to have recovery resources provided to them as a part of their incarceration. And COVID killed, because they can't have a formal program. It's one of the most frustrating elements of our correctional system, so to speak, is they cannot have a formal program that is state operated in the facility, because as soon as they do, all the judges will say, well, they've got this great program over at so and so's county. It looks like that's where you need to go. And it becomes this, let's send people to jail so they get help, which is a ridiculous sentence to say out loud. But if they did something that formal, it absolutely would get utilized by people who were just looking for a way to deal with somebody. So all these programs in the jails were volunteer based. People had to go into the jails. And as soon as it said you can't come into the jails anymore, you had people who had been running these meetings, once a week in the jails for years, some of them. And then they spent 18 months, 2 years, some of them, just barred from the facility. It wasn't even an option anymore. And life goes on. People find other things to do. They go to other meetings, or they try to do something else if that's what they're passionate about. And so rekindling that afterwards, it wasn't even an option for a lot of these jails. They were just without the program that they had been able to utilize for so long. And that's a whole rabbit trail I can get down, where we can do better. Talk about some of your day-to-day struggles as you were working together and get 5, 6, 7 months into the process. What was the day-to-day like as you were, even say right after you got out of your 9 month?
It was a 9-month program. So we were,
After treatment.
after treatment, we were working towards reintegration. Most of our case plan tasks had been accomplished. So we completed treatment. We were going to meetings. We were getting the kids. So we were in town learning how to take them to daycare and to pick them up. And you were working nights. It was hard. He was working nights. We had one vehicle. I was working in St. Joe at the hospital. And I don't know about him. I was fearful to bring the kids home. I actually, ultimately, at the end of it, was so fearful the caseworkers that I had literally set me down and said, "You're ready. Like, we are sending these kids home. You are ready. Stop acting like you're not. We're going to be here to support you."
I think a lot, it was also, they helped with the child daycare and stuff, and at first, for us to get the money together for our vehicle, for our house, gas, just to get back and forth, because now we live in a different town and we're working.
Child support.
Yeah, we had child support we had to pay back to the state and stuff like that, it was
So in my analytical mind, it was like, okay, we bring the kids home and we pay, it's like $200 a week for daycare. Okay, $200 a week for daycare. I can pay $200 a month in child support and they can stay in state custody until. And that was just me, because honestly, finances are a huge, huge fear. Daycare is so expensive. And we were making $10 an hour at the time. And so that was a major pullback for me, was financially, are we going to be able to do it? Because
'cause
when your
daycare costs just as much as what you get in a paycheck.
daycare was more than our rent was going to be, you know? And so that fearful. And so something that they did for us as a result of that was they did cover our daycare costs for the first 3 months until our oldest went into kindergarten. And then we only had one child. Because even though we made $10 an hour, double income, you don't get child care assistance. And so we had built this life and worked our case plan and got these jobs that we were maintaining. And then at the end of that, had they not helped with child care, I would have essentially just had to stay at home because child care costs more than what I made. And then that would be against our case plan because in our case plan it says I have to maintain employment. And so it was just like this circle of things that had to be maintained while not having the finances to do it. So that would be something that we were majorly grateful for too, because we would have been down and out without it.
So besides treatment and meetings, employment, what were some of the other things that they had on your individual treatment plans that you had to, or individual
Plan.
plans? Yeah, to work to get the kids back. Is the other details that you can share on that they were like, hey, this is on the list, you got to do it?
I mean, it was almost everything. You had parenting classes. You got freaking
UAs, and with his last name, you get to do 2 a week, and because we had failed so much, and so our UAs were in Troy once we got out of treatment. So they did allow us to give our UAs while we were in treatment, but once we graduated, those UAs stopped, and so we had to go to the jailhouse. They would tell us we would have so much time.
Yeah, they'd call. I'd get a call at work and say I had 3 hours to be there to take a drug test, and I don't have a vehicle.
So they weren't even scheduled. They were very much
Random.
this time. Wow, that's a big undertaking. And so where were you working that you were having to get to Troy for a UA?
He was at Altec and he had just gotten a daytime position like while he was on nights for like a year, and then he ended up getting a daytime position. So we had one car, we lived in Atchison, have to take a drug screen. Our life kind of looked like I got up early, took him to work at 6 a.m., and then I had to be at work at the hospital at 7:30, and then he would go and hang out with a friend or sometimes work late, and then I would pick him up on my way back through, and then we would come. So that was kind of that dynamic. He never had a car at work.
Wow. So you were wrangling transportation as well in the process of trying to make a last minute UA. Wow.
Yeah.
Whew.
And we both worked in St. Joe at that time.
So you're going from Atchison to St. Joe with UAs in Troy? Is how that was?
Yes.
Okay, that's not complicated at all.
Now, once they came home, our caseworkers actually would bring them with them, and so we were able to do them at home. But yeah, we had hair follicle tests one time.
We drove all the way there, and they didn't even tell us we needed an ID to take them.
Because at that was earlier in our case. We were about 3 months clean or so, and so they wanted a hair follicle test. And at that point, we didn't have a car, so we were
borrowing
we were borrowing my dad's. Was that
your grandma's car?
Oh, was that before we got the van? That was before we got the van, and they wanted a hair follicle test. And so I borrowed my dad's car to take it to his mom's house because his mom's car was the only one that would make it to Topeka, which is where they wanted us to go. Well, I left my purse in my dad's car, and so I didn't have an ID when I got there, and they would not test us. They would not do it.
Just in case we had a twin or something we were sending to take.
Yeah, something weird. And so they actually took our visits. They didn't let us see the children again until they were able to schedule a hair follicle test in St. Joe. And then those take 10 days. So there was like a 3-week period we didn't get to see the kids, even though we were still doing good because of a miscommunication.
Pretty much.
Parenting classes. I think they wanted us to do couples therapy weekly, if not 2 times weekly UAs, maintain employment,
maintain a house,
maintain housing, maintain a vehicle with proper registration. I mean, the list goes on. And that I know that's something that the state is working on because ultimately at the end of the day, did it make sense for us to have a car that had valid registration? Absolutely. But does that make me an incompetent parent? Absolutely not. So that's something that we actually get to work on now because we've been through it and we're looking at things from the bio-parent side. So we get to share our experiences in hopes that some of those things can go away, because just because you don't have a car or a white picket fence does not mean you're a bad mom or dad.
I know a lot of parents right now that don't have a car.
Yeah.
I think it's something that sounds good if you're just putting together a list of requirements and it ignores the implications that individual situations are going to have with it. And so that's again one of those things I hadn't thought about. There's things with the system that don't quite make sense, like especially in foster care. They don't do a good job of having documentation for the kids as far as birth certificates, able to get driver's licenses, able to drive. And so I had somebody that was a manager for a chain restaurant approach me and say, "Hey, you work for one of those companies that is involved in foster care to some extent." I wasn't directly, but they were like, "You're an expert, probably. Why don't you ask this? Why don't we ask you this question?" And they were trying to figure out how they could help foster kids who were trying to get jobs at 16, 17 years old. And none of them had driver's licenses. None of them had a birth certificate. They couldn't show any proof of anything to get gainful employment. And it was just an issue. Like they weren't doing anything to provide that to them. And I don't know if it was a matter of how long they were in the system versus age. I don't know what the details were, but it was a glaring gap. And when I brought that up, they were like, "Yeah, when they pack these kids up, most of the time they're not stopping to get all of the documentation and birth certificates and whatever else. They're just put clothes in a suitcase or a bag and let's go kind of a thing."
Yeah, if that.
If that.
Yeah. And yeah, that might be age based or situation based too, but that was the answer I was given was they don't take kids with the mentality that we're never giving them back. And so this idea of we have to have every single thing that they might need someday didn't really come into it. And so as you can imagine, having bounced around a few places, keeping track of all that documentation in a nice cozy location where you can go, "Oh yeah, it's over here in my nice portable briefcase safe," or whatever, where I have all the rest of our important valuables. Doesn't play into most people's situation when they're going through a substance use disorder. And I hadn't thought about that either, how difficult it would be to maintain those documents and have them available to provide with the foster care or just being able to get those from the home. But yeah, there's a lot of gaps like that, and I think we can do something to close them. So I'm glad you're able to advocate in an area like that comes from very real experience.
Or you could not even know how to drive. I mean, there's people out there that don't ever drive in their life. I've got I know a couple people that have never driven a vehicle and don't plan on driving a vehicle ever, and they're 30 some years old.
I gotta get caught about 15.
Let's see. So talk about life since then. You both mentioned that you spoke at different places. Sean, you went to Washington or to DC to be on a panel or something like that. Hey, tell me what you've been doing since then, because you're still clearly both advocating for biological parents and for people in recovery. Kind of talk about that work, what you're doing there, and we can wrap up so you can get to your next thing.
Well, actually, I just got woke up today by her telling me I got 2 new parents, but I haven't actually contacted them yet. So we are both parent advocates, which help. But so she's been helping a lady with her case for a while, trying to get her kids back, and so far everything's actually going pretty good to where some of the kids have actually started to come home. And yeah, I don't know fully what mine's going to entail yet because I haven't contacted them, but
All cases are different, but
yeah. And also with like Washington, we were just since Washington, we Supreme Court,
we serve as bio parents in the Kansas State Child Welfare Summit. So pretty cool experience. I actually had a Kansas Supreme Court Justice call like my personal cell phone. Crazy, right? And she asked us to come and serve. And so what we did was they asked about struggles and trials and tribulations that we dealt with as parents and bio parents that had been in the system, trying to raise awareness on, the barriers and the things that we can do better within the system. And so we got to use a lot of our real life experiences while also letting it be known that there's good things too, the positive aspect, because like I've said several times throughout this, most of the stuff that happened in our case is not typical. And so to be able to use that and share that is huge, because now we have the things that didn't help us, but then we have the things that are unusual that really did help us. And so we're able to communicate both of those. And there were members from every Kansas judicial branch in the audience of that summit. So it was pretty cool. Definitely felt valued and felt like because we got reviews and stuff like that, and felt like they really took a lot of the stuff to heart. And then he served in a convening in DC. We are parent advocates for the agency that helped us bring our kids home. So what they do, they go onto a website, and we're not affiliated. Well, we're kind of affiliated with the agency, but the understanding is that unless someone is dangerous or going to harm themselves, that, it's just you and I. And so the court system is a very difficult thing to navigate. So being able to help parents through that is huge, really huge. And then something really cool that I'm excited about that we get to do on the 19th is I do a lot of TikTok. I don't want to say influencer because I'm not really that big, but I do a lot of recovery things. And it was really cool. There was a lady that had resonated with my story in bringing my children home and losing my father. She had actually was in the process of bringing her kids home and had commented on one of my videos. We got to talking, and she's only about 4 hours away. So we're going to go up and go to a beach with her and meet her family and just be supportive for her on her journey.
That's awesome.
And he supported me through RN school. So he worked really hard so I could become an RN, and I'm a substance abuse nurse now.
Fantastic. So besides that meeting with that gal that you met, what's next? Is there a next step that you're hoping to go, man, if we could get involved in that, or if we could help out in this area or advocate for this group of people, this is the next step we would take to help them? What would that next step look like?
I think maybe getting into more schools in Missouri instead of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we do go to high school. He's normally the supporter, but we speak at high schools. I haven't been able to get into any schools in Missouri or schools that I feel like actually have a bigger need. So that prevention piece, those high schoolers getting in there and doing some education and prevention and things like that, I think will be huge.
Because I know she probably mentioned it, but like I'd mentioned yesterday, fentanyl crisis is here.
Oh, I forgot about that. I got to speak in front of the Senate in March to pass the Good Samaritan overdose law in the state of Kansas, and it is active as of July.
That's phenomenal. I had gotten out of prevention before I had any updates on that. So that's phenomenal. That was a discussion every single Senate session for the last 3 years. I had coalitions talking about sending people to Topeka to advocate for that here in Kansas. So
Yeah.
that's phenomenal. That's a great thing to hear finally passed. It was a simple thing that we could do, because otherwise it was up to agency discretion on how they handled a response.
Right.
And I think it's a good thing to not punish people who ask for help, or who ask for help, especially for somebody else. It goes above and beyond all
Right.
that. So I'm glad that finally went through. That was way more complicated and difficult than I thought it needed to be. But here we are. We got it finally. I think we're the 49th state, so we're finally not the last state in the country to have a good idea.
Yeah.
So, good for Kansas.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Kansas last on everything.
We do like to let other people go ahead and see how it works first.
Yeah,
That's the downside to Kansas. They don't like to be breakthrough on anything. Hey, thank you so much to both of you. I love the work that you're doing. Your story is phenomenal, and it's relatable, and it's unique in its own amazing way. So thank you both for taking a lot of time out of your week to chat with me and satiate my curiosity for people's recovery stories. Hopefully I can tag you on some clips on Facebook, and you can feel free to rally support. I'm thoroughly enjoying the process of this podcast, and I get to meet a lot of awesome people like yourselves. And so, Sean and Ashley, thank you so much for being a part of the American Recovery Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Have a good night.
You too.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to the American Recovery Podcast. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, and share this episode, or subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, or wherever you listen to podcasts.